I'd like to make a statement regarding the latest developments on Hong Kong. As I feared when I addressed the House on the 2nd of June, yesterday the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress in Beijing adopted a wide-ranging national security law for Hong Kong. This is a grave and deeply disturbing step. We've carefully assessed the legislation, and in particular, we've considered its impact on the rights, freedoms, and critically, the high degree of autonomy bestowed on Hong Kong under China's basic law for Hong Kong, as well as under the joint declaration, which, as the House will know, is the treaty agreed between China and the UK in 1984. So, Mr. Speaker, today I have the depressing but necessary duty to report to the House that the enactment of this legislation imposed by the authorities in Beijing on the people of Hong Kong constitutes a clear and serious breach of the joint declaration. Let me explain to the House the grounds for this sobering conclusion. First, Mr. Speaker, the legislation violates the high degree of autonomy, executive and legislative powers, and independent judicial authority provided for in paragraph 3 of the joint declaration. The imposition of this legislation by the government in Beijing, rather than it being left to Hong Kong's own institutions, is also, it should be noted, in direct conflict with Article 23 of China's own basic law for Hong Kong, which affirms that Hong Kong should bring forward its own national security legislation. In fact, the basic law elaborates on this and only allows Beijing to directly impose laws in a very limited number of cases, such as for the purposes of defence, foreign affairs, or in exceptional circumstances in which the National People's Congress declares a state of war or a state of emergency. None of those exceptions apply here, nor has the National People's Congress sought to justify this law on any such ground. Second, Mr. Speaker, the national security legislation contains a slew of measures that directly threaten the freedoms and rights protected by the joint declaration. In this respect, the House will be particularly concerned by the potentially wide-ranging ability of the mainland authorities to take jurisdiction over certain cases without any independent oversight and to try those cases in Chinese courts. This measure violates paragraph 3, subparagraph 3 and 5 of the Joint Declaration and directly threatens the rights contained in the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which under the Joint Declaration are to be protected in Hong Kong. And I think in particular it's worth saying that those measures represent a flagrant assault on freedom of speech and freedom of peaceful protest for the people of Hong Kong. Third, Mr. Speaker, the legislation provides that Hong Kong's chief executive, rather than the Chief Justice, will appoint judges to hear national security cases, a move that clearly risks undermining the independence of Hong Kong's judiciary, again, which is protected by paragraph 3, subparagraph 3 of the Joint Declaration. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, the legislation provides for the establishment by the Chinese government of a new Office for Safeguarding National Security in Hong Kong, run by and reporting to the mainland authorities. That is particularly worrying, Mr. Speaker, because that office is given wide-ranging powers, directly intruding on the responsibility of the Hong Kong authorities to maintain public order, again, directly in breach of the Joint Declaration, this time paragraph 3, subparagraph 11. Mr. Speaker, the authorities in Hong Kong have already started to enforce this legislation with reports of arrests by the police and official notices warning the people of Hong Kong against waving flags or chanting. In sum, Mr. Speaker, this legislation has been enacted, as I said, in clear and serious breach of the Joint Declaration. China has broken its promise to the people of Hong Kong under its own laws. China has breached its international obligations to the United Kingdom under the Joint Declaration. And it's also worth saying, Mr. Speaker, that having committed to apply the UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to the people of Hong Kong, China has now written into law wide-ranging exemptions which cannot credibly be reconciled with its international obligations or indeed its responsibilities as a leading member of the international community. Mr. Speaker, we want a positive relationship with China. We recognise its growth, its stature, and the powerful role it can play in the world. And I would say it is precisely because we respect China as a leading member of the international community, that we expect the Chinese government to meet its international obligations to live up to its international responsibilities. It has failed to do so with respect to Hong Kong by enacting legislation which violates its autonomy and threatens the strangulation of its freedoms. It is a sad day for the people of Hong Kong, and one which can only undermine international trust in the Chinese government's willingness to keep its word and live up to its promises. For our part, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and the government are crystal clear. The United Kingdom will keep its word. We will live up to our responsibilities to the people of Hong Kong. And I can tell the House that after further detailed discussions with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, I can now confirm we will proceed to honour our commitment to change the arrangements for those holding B&O status. And I can update honourable members that we have worked with ministers right across Whitehall, and we have now developed proposals for a bespoke immigration route for B&Os and their dependents. We will grant B&Os 5 years limited leave to remain with the right to work or study. After these 5 years, they'll be able to apply for settled status. And after a further 12 months with settled status, they will be able to apply for citizenship. This is a special, bespoke set of arrangements developed for the unique circumstances we faced and in light of our historic commitment to the people of Hong Kong. All of those with B&O status will be eligible, as will their family dependents who are usually resident in Hong Kong, and the Home Office will put in place a simple, streamlined application process, and I can reassure honourable members there will be no quotas on numbers. I want to pay tribute to the Home Secretary and her excellent team at the Home Office for their work and help in preparing, let's face it, for a moment that we all dearly hoped would not arrive. And the Home Secretary will set out further details of our approach in due course. Mr. Speaker, in addition to changing the arrangements for B&Os, the UK will continue to work with our international partners to consider what further action we should responsibly take next. And I can tell the House that yesterday in the United Nations Human Rights Council, the UK made a formal joint statement expressing our deep concern about the human rights situation in both Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Mr. Speaker, 26 other nations joined that statement, and this was the first time a formal statement has been made at the Human Rights Council on this issue, and it was delivered through our diplomatic leadership. We will continue to work with our partners in the G7, partners in the EU, and our partners across the region. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd say again that we want a positive relationship with China, but we will not look the other way when it comes to Hong Kong, and we will not duck our historic responsibilities to its people. We will continue to bring together our international partners, to stand up for the people of Hong Kong, to call out the violations of their freedoms, to hold China to its international obligations freely assumed under international law, and I commend this statement to the House.